Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We are proud to present you the second season of the Loisville Lecture Series.
One sec, Paritosh, one sec. It takes time to load. Wait.
I guess we are live on Facebook.
It says it's live.
Yeah, it says we are live.
Start.
Okay. I'll start again. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We are proud to present you the second season of the Lawyers with Lecture Series. Today's webinar is brought to you in collaboration with the Virtual Lawyer. Over the course of this month, we will be conducting a number of webinars on all the relevant topics of law. I'm proud and delighted to present you the webinar today on the topic National Sports Federation, its issues and laws, by a speaker, Ms. Kanisshka Tyagi, Advocate, Delhi High Court. Over to you, ma'am. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much, Paritosh, for the introduction.
Excuse me, ma'am. I'll just.
Please continue, ma'am. Please continue.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Paritosh, for introducing me and for those kind words. Today's webinar is on national sports federations. What are the issues that national sports federations usually face, and what are the laws which govern national sports federations? But before we jump on to understand that what are the issues that NSFs face or what are the laws that govern, we need to understand what are the these bodies which are known as national sports federation. And to answer that, we have to answer another question, that what are sports federations? Because there are sports federations, and then there are certain sports federations which are deemed to be or which are identified as national sports federations. So to talk about sports federations are basically any body, any private body which is responsible for developing and promoting a particular sport in an area, in a physical area, or probably in a state, in a country, or probably internationally also. So sports body can be anybody which is private. These sports bodies are usually registered as societies, as non-profit organizations, either as society or trust. They can also register themselves as company under Section 8 of Companies Act in India. However, before I explain further what exactly a sports federation, I would also like to explain that there is something called pyramid structure of sports governance around the world. What that pyramid structure means is that there are bodies at state level or district level in a country. Then over and above those sports bodies, there are sports bodies at national level in a country. And then over and above that, there are sports bodies at international level. And at the top is Olympic Association, International Olympics Committee. So this is the pyramid structure. We call it pyramid because there is a hierarchy which is followed around the world for every sport, in which on top there is the Olympics body, which governs the entire Olympics movement, Olympic sports in entire world, and then the international federation of that particular sport, and then the national sports bodies of all the countries, and finally the state bodies affiliated to that national body of that country. If I were to explain this with the help of an example, I'll take example of India's most popular game, which is cricket. Cricket, we all know, is governed and regulated by BCCI in India, which is Board of Cricket Control in India. And BCCI in turn is affiliated with ICC, International Cricket Council. Because cricket is not a Commonwealth or Olympics Games or an Asian Games, it's not included in Asian Games, Commonwealth Games or Olympic Games. Cricket's international body, that is ICC, is not affiliated with International Olympics Committee. However, had that been any other sport, say not football, let's say gymnasts or any other sport, rowing, and many sports, they are in turn also registered or affiliated with International Olympics Committee. So this is the pyramid structure which exists for all the sports around the world, and in India also, because we represent, our players represents us on international platform, we also follow this structure. Now there is one principle behind this pyramid structure, and that is autonomy. There is a consensus around the world in the sporting sector and the people, the stakeholders in the sports sector, that sport and sport bodies need to be autonomous when it comes to their functioning, internal functioning, or whether their functioning or their relationship with the outside world, they need to be autonomous. Now, why they need to be autonomous? Because sports is kind, there are multiple purposes that any particular sport furnishes, fulfills. For instance, people get to better their performance, people get to prove themselves, and people also get to bring accolades to for their country. So sports is thought to be, is seen as something, a discipline which should be kept out of purview of very deep and pervasive control of governments in the countries. So that is why these bodies are autonomous, they're independent to a great extent, and that is why not government bodies but private bodies are sporting bodies around the world. Now let's come to national sports bodies in India. What are national sports bodies? As the name itself signify, that national means it has, its area of operation is entire country, entire India, and obviously it also has power, it is entitled to govern that sport in entire India across all the states. But is this status of being national sports body governed by someone? Then the straight answer is yes. That status is conferred upon sporting bodies by government of India, and that status is now governed on annual basis. On what basis this status is conferred? Basically, it is seen whenever there are multiple sporting bodies for a particular sports. There are many sports for which multiple sporting bodies exist at national level. And but what government, before granting that, before conferring that status of being NSF, sees is that it needs to be the primary body in our country which takes care of promotion and development of that sport in India. Secondly, that particular body, national body, also needs to be registered with the International Sporting Federation for that particular state. So if we talk about any sport, let's say kabaddi's, or kabaddi's or athletics national bodies in turn are also required to be affiliated with World Athletics in athletics and International Kabaddi Federation in kabaddi. Similarly, for other sports also, if you want to be known as National Sports Federation in our country for a particular sport, you need to be affiliated with the international body of that sport. Thirdly, it is also seen what kind of activities you've been undertaking for past 3 years. Whether you've been conducting national championships in the past 3 years, in the past few years or not. How you are selecting your candidates, what is the way you govern internally, that is what is the modus operandi that you follow to conduct your elections, to select your office bearers, whether there is enough representation of sports persons on your committee, on your governing committee. So these are few factors which are considered by Government of India before that status of being National Sports Federation for a particular sport is conferred upon you. Once it is conferred, you are entitled to receive certain benefits, and those benefits are quite considerable, and you need those benefits in order to survive, in order to play that role of being the National Sports Federation in our country. So I told you that it is a status which is conferred on annual basis by Government of India, but under what law? Well, that is very interesting, that what law governs National Sports Federation. So there is something called National Sports Development Code 2011, which basically talks about National Sports Federation and also other aspects related to sports development in India. Basically, National Sports Development Code of 2011 is nothing, but it is a consolidation of all the orders and circulars that have been issued by Government of India from time to time. So there have been number of circulars that government has issued for many years now, and those have been consolidated and placed under one in one place, and that compilation is known as National Sports Development Code of 2011. National Sports Development Code 2011 basically deals with three major aspects. Certainly, it deals with other areas relating to sports, but primarily and majorly, it deals with three major aspects. First is it defines areas of responsibility of the various agencies which are involved in promotion and development of sports. If I were to tell you that what are those agencies which are involved in development of sports, then primarily there are three sorts of agencies. First is your National Sports Federation. Secondly, you have your MIAS, which is MYAS, Ministry of Youth Affairs and Sports. Thirdly, your Sports Authority of India. So these are three major agencies which are involved in sports promotion and development. NSF on one hand are private bodies and a special status is conferred upon them, and as opposed to NSF, SAI, which is Sports Authority of India, and Ministry of Youth Affairs and Sports, that is actually, as we all know, those are government bodies. And this Ministry and Sports Authority, they help and assist NSFs in different sports to ensure that infrastructure is available for sports promotion and development, that money is also available for sports promotion and development, that talent is also available, talent in form of coaches, support staff, your physiotherapists. A lot of support staff these days is used by to be used is these days is used by sports persons. So these three agencies come together and they ensure that sports in general are promoted and developed and given the due importance in our country. Second thing which National Sports Development Code of 2011 talks about is it identifies those NSFs which are eligible for coverage under the guidelines. Basically, it sets priorities and it details the procedures to be followed by the federations for availing government sponsorship and assistance. So what happens? We all know that the funds of our government are limited. Resources are limited. And those resources on yearly basis are earmarked for different purposes. For instance, there is a portion of those resources which is put separately for education. There is a portion of resources that is earmarked for sports development. Similarly, there are other areas, health, and then infrastructure development, which takes care of your road and everything else. So that is why, because our resources are limited, we cannot grant, Government of India cannot grant aid to each and every sporting federation that exists in our country. Even if we consider the case of National Sports Federation, money cannot be given to each and every sports federation. Government of India has basically identified those NSFs which are given priority over the other. Now, it's a very basic criteria that those sports which are Olympic sports, which are included in major international sports competition, those are given priority over the other sports. So, for instance, something like athletics will be given preference over sports climbing, mountain climbing sport. So, because athletics is part of Olympics, it's part of Commonwealth Games, it's also part of Asian Games. So all major international competitions include athletics. In fact, it's not just an Olympic sport. It also always is included in the sorry final roster of these events. That means there shall always be events, competitions which shall be assigned, specially designated separately for athletics events in these international sporting competitions. So these priority areas are so NSFs or sports for that matter are divided into priority sector and other sector. So priority, those sports which fall in the priority sector, they get preference over the other sporting federations, and money is granted in for as first preference to those sports and to those NSFs which fall in the priority sector. And a third thing that this National Sports Development Code talks about is it lays down eligibility conditions that exist that government has enacted for receipt of government recognition and grant. So now, if I were to summarize that, what are the three areas which National Sports Development Code of 2011 talk about? Firstly, it defines the responsibility of all the agencies concerned. Agencies are NSFs, Ministry of Youth Affairs and Sports, and Sports Authority of India. Secondly, it identifies those NSFs which are eligible for coverage under these guidelines. And thirdly, it also states eligibility conditions which are necessary, which must be met by an NSF for receiving government recognition and grant. So this recognition, which is conferred upon any sporting body and this status which is conferred on these bodies of being the national sporting federation in our country, this is conferred upon them on annual basis. If they do not satisfy this criteria on year-to-year basis, that conferment, that status is withdrawn from National Sporting Federation. If you read newspapers or e-newspapers these days, everybody reads news these days on phones and tablets and laptops. If you read news, then you would have seen that recently Government of India derecognized, which means withdrew the status of being NSF from 54 national sports federation for not complying with the National Sports Development Code of 2011. That matter is pending. However, as on date, the status has been withdrawn. So SAI, Sports Authority of India, is actually these days directly responsible for development and promotion of these sports in India. So what happens if this status is withdrawn and if the NSFs do not comply with these guidelines on year-to-year basis and this status of being the National Sports Federation is withdrawn? Then the National Sports Development Code very clearly lays down that there are certain things, there are certain benefits which were conferred upon you by virtue of you being the NSF. Those are taken away from you. Very simple. And what are those benefits? I would list just few benefits which are more important than the others. Firstly, if that status has been withdrawn, you shall lose your power of selecting national team and sending that national team to international events. That's a very obvious outcome if you do not comply with the code of 2011. You also cannot use India in your name because India signifies that you have that national character. You have the power to have your operations, to have your jurisdiction across India. But if you've not complied with this code, anything, you violated any terms and conditions, that status has been withdrawn, so you cannot use the word India in your name. You shall lose your all India character, that prominence that you have, that primacy that is given, that preference that is given to you over other sporting bodies. You shall lose that character. You shall not be able to avail custom duty exemptions that are given to you whenever you import sports equipment or any sporting good. So if you've Your badminton federation, and you've imported rackets and shuttlecocks from outside India, then as an NSF, you are entitled to receive custom duty exemptions. You're not required to pay custom duty, but if you lose that status, then that benefit shall not be available to you. Similarly, tax exemptions will not be available to people who donate money to you, because whenever you donate money to a non-profit organization, if it has existed for 3 years and if it has registered with taxation authorities, then people who donate money to you are given, they can claim that as they can deduct, that shall not be deemed to be that part of money which they have donated, that shall not be deemed to be part of taxable income when they file their annual returns annually. So this benefit which you offer to your people who donate money to you, that you will not be in a position to extend that benefit to people who donate money to you. Also, if that status is withdrawn, the sports persons who play under your ages, they will not be eligible, they will not be considered for government jobs under sports quota. And also, they shall not be considered for admissions to under sports quota in universities. So these are few benefits that are available to you by virtue of you being National Sports Federation, and these are taken away from you if you violate the terms and conditions and all the provisions which are laid down in National Sports Development Code of 2011. So let's just recap a bit here. We so far discussed that what are national sports federations and what is the law which governs NSFs in India. National Sports Federation, in a nutshell, a national sports federation is a body. It's a private body, probably registered under Societies Act, or probably registered under as trust, or probably registered under Section 8 of Companies Act of 2013. These are non-profit organizations. NSFs are the primary body for regulating and governing a particular sport in India. NSFs are also in turn registered and affiliated with the international federation that exists for promotion and development of that sport at international level. And the status of being NSF is conferred by Government of India on the basis of a criteria which is laid down in National Sports Development Code. The law which governs NSF's recognition and also NSF's functioning and also role that NSFs are expected to play has been laid down in detail in National Sports Development Code of India. So now we move to the next subtopic that we wish to discuss, and that must be discussed whenever we are discussing National Sports Federation, that is who has actually the power to legislate on matters relating to National Sports Federation. If we consider National Sports Development Code, then we realize that it's not a legislation which has been passed by Parliament, nor it's a legislation which has been passed by legislature of any state government, but these are government orders, government circulars. So these have been issued at central level, but these are not acts enacted. This is not an act enacted by Parliament of our country. So this matter has been discussed time and again. In fact, it has gone to courts also, and courts have also discussed this at length. And courts have considered certain entries in Schedule 7 of our Constitution, and they found that it is actually entry 33 in list 2, which is state list in Schedule 7 of Constitution, which directly talks of sports. So if you read entry 33, it says that theaters, dramatic performance, cinema, sports, entertainments, and amusements. So all these areas, only state governments, because these areas are mentioned in entry 33 of state list of Schedule 7. So only the state governments, state legislatures have power to enact laws on this particular area. But central government issues these orders and circulars time and again. And in fact, this compilation has also come in form of National Sports Development Code 2011. on the basis of entry 10 and entry 13 in list 1, which is central list. That is a list of those subjects on which only central government, only parliament has power to legislate. So entry 10 talks about foreign affairs, all matters which bring the Union of India into relation with any foreign country. And similarly, entry 13 talks about participation in international conferences. So if you were to see that, if you were to consider sports and sporting relations at international level, then you will just realize that what is an international sporting contest. Different countries come together, and uh, it actually, these sporting events bring the union, which is India, into relation with foreign countries. So in a way, under entry 10, parliament does have power to legislate on sports related or NSS related areas. And also, if you participate, let's say a sporting federation participates in a conference which is organized by the International Federation of that sport, that will be governed under entry 30. So this matter has been discussed by Delhi High Court in Indian Olympic Association versus Union of India, which is a decision of year 2012. There have been other cases also where this issue has been discussed, but in this particular case, it was issued in I'm sorry, in detail. So what basically, I will just explain few broad observations that Delhi High Court, Honorable Delhi High Court made on this particular issue. It said that National Sports Development Code, it deals with many aspects and not just sports. For instance, it deals with responsibility of different agencies that are involved in sports development and promotion. It also talks about that teams are supposed to go outside. You have to take permission from the government if you want to send your teams to international competitions. So this aspect of sending teams to international competitions, it does involve foreign affairs angle, and only states have you know exclusive competence to legislate over sports when it comes to sports within their territories, which is, let's say, if state of UP has full power to legislate on any sport for that matter, but there is one restriction, that you can legislate on it when that sporting activity is restricted within the state of UP itself. But when we talk about NSFs and the scope and role of NSFs, then those sporting activities are undertaken between, either between different states or between different countries. So that kind of activity, which is, you know, which happens across India at that kind of level, and in fact at international level, only Union of India can legislate on such a matter. It was held and observed by Delhi High Court. So these are few basic points on the basis of which Delhi High Court held that National Sports Development Code of 2011 is valid, it is applicable on national sports federations, and also government has power, central government has power to legislate under entry 10 and entry 13. However, this tussle between center and state has been going on for years, and the ultimate objective of central government is to take sports from state list and put it in concurrent list, so that we can have a uniform legislation on sports, which shall govern each sporting activity across our country, because there are few states which have legislated, which have come up with sports act also, but again that restriction is there, that sports act can govern and can legislate only for those sporting activities which take place within the physical restriction of that particular state. So government of India also tried to pass enact national sports bill, but that could not see light of the day. So on several occasions this has come to for this controversy, that central government wishes to include sports in concurrent list and not just in state list. So that is that basically that uh, argument is based on the idea that if there is a uniform legislation in form of an act by parliament, which is legislated by parliament, then there shall be uniformity in implementation of those rules across the country, and all the federations at district level, at state level, and obviously at national level, they shall be government will be in a better position to ensure that they are run uniformly with transparency, with accountability, and all the principles of natural justice and fair play are observed by these federations. So basically, in nutshell, that government which has issued these circulars and orders and which are consolidated in National Sports Development Code of 2011, those are valid, and government has been deemed to have had power, sufficient power to come up with these circulars and orders. Another question, very important question, which, and in fact, our courts in our country have grappled with that question time and again. And that question is whether national sports federations are state or not. State or not, when I say state here, I mean state under Article 12 of the Constitution, and whether writs under Article 226 or Article 32 lie against them or not. So we all know that there are two articles in Constitution of India, Article 226 and Article 32. Article 226 empowers High Court. It says that High Court is empowered to issue to any person or authority directions. We all know those writs, habeas corpus, mandamus, prohibition, and quo warranto and certiorari. Those writs can be issued by High Court to any person or any authority. And the purpose for which those directions and orders and writs can be issued are for enforcement of rights conferred by Part 3, that is fundamental rights, and for any other purpose. There is one more word which is actually a set of words which is used in Article 26 for any other purpose. So it's not scope of Article 226. Is not just restricted to use that power is not restricted to being used only for enforcement of rights conferred by Part 3 of the Constitution. Similarly, Article 32 empowers Supreme Court. Supreme Court can also issue those directions, orders, or writs, but only for enforcement of rights conferred by Part 3 of the Constitution. So, what is a writ? If in simple words, writ is a command which is issued by court and which asks or directs a person or authority to act or abstain from acting. HC has that power. High courts of country have power under Article 26 to issue those writs, and similarly, Supreme Court of our country has that power under Article 32. So, for this power is primarily and on most occasion has been used for protecting fundamental rights against state. State, this word has been defined under Article 12 of the Constitution of India. Article 12 includes government and its legislature, which is parliament, state governments and state legislatures, local and other authorities in India, or under the control of government of India. So courts over the years, whenever they grappled with this issue, whether a particular body is state or not, and whether writ can be filed, writ can be accepted, can be issued against that particular body for enforcing fundamental right or not. So while uh, observing, while dealing with that kind of question, courts developed tests to find out if a body is can be deemed to be state under Article 12 or not. So few tests that have been developed by courts are: first is the structure or character of that organization, whether it has been created by a statute or not. Then what is the degree of control that is exercised in that body by state? Is it deep and pervasive control? What is the nature of functions? Does that body perform public functions of public nature? Whether it enjoys any monopoly in the sector that it operates, and whether that monopoly is conferred or protected by state action. with reference to specific reference to state sports bodies, national sports federation. This question has also been directly dealt with courts in India, and Supreme Court directly dealt with this question in Z Telefilms Limited versus Union of India, which is a 2005 judgment in which it was held by Supreme Court that BCCI, which is a body kind of a national sports federation for cricket. I'll let you know why I said kind of. BCCI is a private body and it is a society which is registered under Tamil Nadu Society Registration Act, and it enjoys a monopoly in the domain of cricket in India, but that monopoly is not protected by state. It does not meet the structural test to qualify as state. So, in a nutshell, it was said that BCCI is not state. Similarly, this question was also dealt in BCCI versus Cricket Association of Bihar. Here, court held that BCCI is not state and fundamental rights are not enforceable against it, but it performs public function and it can be made subject to judicial review under Article 226. That means you can these sporting bodies are amenable to writ jurisdiction, but that those writs will be issued not to enforce fundamental rights, but to to for reviewing the administrative action. So after that, that position has continued, that has been accepted by courts, and now writs are filed against these sporting federations, national sports federations, and writs are issued by courts. However, these writs are only issued by high courts because only high court has power of judicial review, of reviewing administrative actions under Article 226, while Article 32 is only restricted to enforce fundamental rights. So these are not state in nutshell, and but they are amenable to writ jurisdiction, and their actions can be judicially reviewed by high courts of different states. Usually it is the Delhi High Court. Why? Because National Sports Development Code specifies that the secretary of all the sporting federations must necessarily be present in Delhi. So that is why High Court gets jurisdiction in most of the writs which are filed against these national sporting federations. So I said while discussing BCCI, I said kind of national sports federation, and that reminds me that I skipped an important part that I must have discussed. That what happens, what is the I discussed the benefits that are available to national sports federation if that status is conferred upon them. But one very important benefit that sports federations get if they are recognized as being national sports federation is that they get money from government of India. So if you're not an NSF, you are not entitled to receive grant from government of India. However, having said that, government does give grant to those sporting federations also under different schemes of government, which are not NSF, which are not probably Olympic sports, which are not included in other major international sporting event. But the extent of grant that is given to NSFs is much bigger. NSFs are given grant for holding national championships, for holding national camps also to train the team which has been selected, and also for uh, giving prize money also, and for coaches also, training of coaches and support staff also. That money is grant is given by government of India. So why BCCI is kind of NSF and not really NSF? Because BCCI does not depend on government of India for funds. It has enough funds. It's very rich. It's the richest board in the world, and it does not need assistance in financial assistance from government of India. So that is why it's not NSF. Though it is NSF in a way because BCCI does enjoy that monopoly, which is recognized by court also. It is only BCCI which organizes cricket tournaments and which sends Indian team outside. In fact, one very harsh measure that BCCI is empowered and does employ time and again is that BCCI has power to ban those players which participate in either rival leagues or which participate in leagues which are organized outside country without taking prior permission from BCCI. I'm forgetting the name of the player who was recently, not very recently, in 2019, this young player was banned because he participated in a league which was organized in Canada, if I remember correctly. Yes. So BCCI has that power. It enjoys monopoly. So here, what we've seen is that national sports federations are not state. They are not that other authority under Article 12, but still writs are issued against them, and they are not free, completely free from judicial review. They are answerable. They are not only answerable to Government of India by under the provisions of National Sports Development Code 2011, but they're also answerable to courts whenever somebody approaches court, High Court. Now, these are few basic issues. Those are related to national sports federations. There can be other issues also. One issue which is not directly dealt with by National Sports Development Code is governance of those sports which are not Olympic sports, because NSF's that status of being NSF is actually granted only to those sports which are Olympic sport. But there are many sports which are not Olympic sport. Let's say esports. Esports, I think only on one occasion esport has been played during Olympics, and that too only as it was not part of the final roster of formal events, but it was just displayed, showcased that this esports exist. And so for something like esports, if it is not an international, if it's not an Olympic sport, National Sports Development Code does not talk about governance of these sporting federations. It does say that if a non-Olympic sports body wishes to seek that status of being NSF, it has to satisfy an additional criteria which has been laid down in National Sports Development Code. But it does not talk about that what happens if it does not either seek that status, or if that status is not granted, nor that status is granted by Government of India. How, if let's say there is this sporting federation of a sport which is not Olympic sport, and they completely function in absolute violation of the terms and conditions which have been laid down in National Sports Development Code, does that mean because that sport is not Olympic sports, can that sporting federation be uh, completely non-transparent? Then can that sporting federation be completely autonomous, not answerable either to Government of India or courts? So this issue has not very clearly been dealt with. And in fact, this has, in my understanding, has not been raised before high courts also. That, I think, we've discussed primarily all the major issues that are related with national sports federations in our country. And I would now request Shanu to please include questions here if we have any questions. Shanu, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Do we have some questions here?
Yes, ma'am. That was a great talk, ma'am. I do have a few
Please switch on
questions.
your camera.
So my first question is, why don't we have a uniformity in voting patterns and choice across NSF?
Yes. So you said what I could understand, because you were not very clear, that why don't we have uniformity in voting patterns across NSFs? Well, basically, each NSF
Yes, ma'am.
is different. It governs different sport, and it is affiliated to a different international sporting body. Because if you talk about athletics, you talk about football, hockey, kabaddi, these are different sports, and different international sporting federation exists for these sporting bodies. So these sporting bodies are required to build their constitution, their bylaws, which are in sync with the bylaws of the international federation also. Having said that, National Sporting Federation does require all these National Sports Development Code does require all the NSFs to ensure that there are few broad principles which it abides by when it comes to either voting or holding elections or selecting the officials of governing committee. So there is in a way uniformity, but of course that is not absolutely similar. Those rules do differ when it comes to different sports, and that's very obvious because the international federation differs, those rules also slightly differ, and that is why there is no uniformity. But broadly, at broad level, you have to, each sporting federation has to follow all the broad principles relating to transparency and accountability, and also relating to conditions relating to tenure of your office bearers. But I would also like to add here that the international federations which are affiliated in turn with International Commission, Olympic Committee. So Olympics Committee at international level also require international federations to follow these principles of fair play, to be transparent, to follow the principles of good governance. So at broadly, the principles of governance of sports for each sport body, whether that is a national body or an international, that remains same. But the structure, the real functioning, actual functioning may differ slightly for each sporting federation. I hope I have answered that.
Okay, ma'am. So my second question would be, what is the National Sports Development Code of 2011, and what is the legal status of this code?
Am I audible now, Shanu?
Yes, ma'am, you're audible.
So I discussed that in detail, that what is a National Sports Development Code of 2011. It's a consolidation at one place of all the circulars and orders that have been issued by Government of India relating to National Sports Federation and general sports governance and general sports development and promotion. And also, Delhi High Court has held that government has power to legislate, to issue these circulars and orders, and it is very well binding on all the National Sports Federation and also all the stakeholders in the sporting sector. So it is valid and binding on everyone, whoever is concerned with sport. Yeah. Do we have next another
Okay,
question?
ma'am. Yes, ma'am. I have my third question. What are the probable reasons behind underdevelopment of sports in India?
Well, that's quite a vast topic, and it can be discussed in a series of webinars wherein maybe we can have sports persons also to express their views. But
Just a few, according to you.
coming to that, primary reasons for underdevelopment of sports is mismanagement of sports authorities. Because usually, if you would see the governing bodies of the committees of these sporting bodies, the representation of sports persons themselves is not much on the committees of these sporting bodies. And there are many people who are not even related to sports, who have nothing to do with sports, who are on the committees of these sports federations. So I would say, if you want a sport to be governed properly, to be managed properly, you need to have more representation from sports players themselves, from athletes themselves, because they've played the game at national, international level. They know what a player goes through. They know how, and in which ways and when a player should be rewarded. So they know everything related to life of a sports person and also sports support staff also. So that is why, that is one reason. Second reason that I see is lack of infrastructure. We do not have enough stadia. We do not have enough areas where children can play. In old times, we would have, in fact, open medans, open grounds, but now you see landscaped gardens everywhere. So children do not get that open space to play. Even if we forget about properly developed stadium, we do not even have enough sufficient area to play. Thirdly, my personal opinion that we lack sporting culture in India. There are few pockets, let's say West Bengal also, where sports is worshipped, but we lack that culture. Do you see in your society or in your resident welfare association organizes any, in your area, resident welfare association organizes any sporting tournaments within the colony, maybe Olympics of Mayur Vihar, Olympics of Delhi? So that sporting culture, I believe, is missing, where people, kids are basically exposed to different kind of tournaments at frequently, because in schools, yes, they do get that kind of exposure, but not every child gets that kind of exposure, because every school is not very serious about sports. There are few which are doing really well, but that culture is missing. These are three primary reasons that I gave you. I think these are responsible. Obviously there are other reasons also. Another reason that I wish to mention here is, I think the money that we spend on sports development. I read a story long back that UK spends huge amount of money on each medal that it has earned so far at Olympics, and India spends. You already know that India has won very few number of medals at Olympics since independence, but India has spent only, I think, 1/10 of the amount that UK spends on its medals. That number may be wrong, but the bottom line is that we do not spend enough money on sports infrastructure and sports training and sports talent identification and also sports development and promotion in general. So these are few reasons which I feel are responsible for underdevelopment of sports in India. Yeah, any other question that you have, Shanu?
That was great, ma'am. No, ma'am, that is all about it. That's the only questions I had. But there's one more thing I want to do. I would also like to take this opportunity to tell people a few things about you, ma'am. Kanishka Tyagi is currently leading Business Strategies Department of Ligam MQS, a young dynamic law firm having offices at New Delhi and UAE. After graduating from Campus Law Center, Delhi University, Kanishka worked with a couple of law firms in Delhi. She joined Caden Boris, a global law firm, as part-time in 2011. Kanishka has executed and advised both foreign and domestic companies on transactions related to private equity investments, real estate acquisitions, corporate restructuring arrangements, commercial contracts, and secretarial matters. Besides, Kanishka has been a regular contributor to law magazines and journals, and regular speaker at conferences and seminars, and has addressed a wide variety of audiences at various platforms on corporate legal issues. Being a sports and
I think we lost her there.
Yeah, I think we lost her. In all, ma'am, I would further like to thank you again. Thank you for taking out time from your busy schedule and explaining us such an important and a relevant topic. I'm sure that our viewers, all the law students, participants, and everyone who has joined this session today, they are all very grateful for your session, ma'am.
Thank you so
It was
much.
quite enlightening. And I would further like to thank Mr. Tarveen Singh Nanda and Lois Bit, Shanu Agarwal. I think she is back. Thank you, Shanu. And further, I would like to thank Janvi Sharma and Govind Chaturvedi. It was a great session, ma'am. This is your host, Paritur Dhawan, signing off. Thank you so much, ma'am.
thank you, ma'am.